Right then, and we're live. Here we are, LovoCast, episode 4. Welcome, everybody. Which probably means about 2 or 3 people at this stage, but that is absolutely fine. I'm doing this for fun. Slowly incrementing the technology and what I've got going on. And you see I've got the fuzzy blue screen that I've not figured out yet. I've not even managed to change the picture from last time, and I am joined by my lovely friend, Mr. Activity. How you doing?
Yes, I'm doing quite all right. How about yourself?
I'm doing very well. I am getting over a bit of a cold, so I apologize if I'm sniffly, or I did just blow my nose about 30 seconds before we started rolling and broke your eardrum. So I'll make sure I'll mute before I do anything like that again. But if I'm sniffly or I sound a bit less a bit block nosy, that's why. How are you today?
Yeah, quite good. Apologies for being so difficult to schedule with, but
I think that's, from what I understand here and from other people who do podcast talk, I think that's par for the course. Like,
right.
They're always talking about, we've been trying to get this going for 6 months. Here we finally are. So in the scheme of things, perhaps you're not that
bad. Sure.
Other than forgetting about your long-standing appointments that you forgot that we were clashing with.
Oh yes, it's absolutely just me being terrible at planning stuff. No, nothing else.
So welcome to the podcast. You and I are I say friends, internet friends, probably more accurate description, but in this day and age that just counts as regular friends, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah. I agree.
Would you like to sort of do a bit of an intro of yourself, perhaps start about how we know each other from your perspective, and then we'll sort of roll from there?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Activity, aka Robin. I think I'm not quite sure how long we've known each other, but it started with this group that we both fly with, the refugees. Was in there for a while. Then I think during COVID or probably just prior to COVID was when I joined, and everyone had way too much free time then, so we played a bunch. I think around about that time you joined as well, or maybe it was after. I don't quite remember.
The golden age of refugees.
Exactly.
Right at the beginning, really.
Yeah, when no one else had anything better to do, and it was a terrible time in the real world.
Yes, missions for days.
Yeah. So I think that's where we met, which at this point I guess it's like 4 years ago. And then we still fly together. Me a little bit less than I would have hoped. But here we are.
And what you do some stuff with DCS that most people don't do, and a lot of that is aside from just getting you on for a natter, it's some of the other useful stuff that I thought we could talk about today. So maybe you want to talk about how you play DCS, but then also the ways in which you're involved with DCS that perhaps people like me aren't.
Yeah, sure. So the basic gist of it is, I guess round about that time as well, I started making a bunch of missions for just people in the refugee group to fly, obviously. I kind of got more and more elaborate to a point where I started making more single-player missions, and through that I got involved with Reupload. So I make some missions that are in the F4 Phantom module. Similar to how Setlow and Reflected did some really cool missions for it. I also have them with testing stuff. That's no secret. Obviously, I'm not part of Reupload anyway, so I don't represent them. But
let me make a banner. While you're talking, I'm going to make a banner for that.
Yeah, sure. I just help with stuff. It was cool to be part of testing the Phantom, and I'm hoping most people are happy with how it came out. I did my part, at least. That's what I'd like to think.
I spell subsidiaries.
Christ. Subsidiaries. No, that's absolutely wrong.
Come on, autocorrect, fix it for me. Here we go. Does that work?
Yes, exactly.
That's not. We need a lawyer to check on the legalese there.
Yes,
nothing to do with. I don't think that's a particularly very legal way of putting it, but that's the best I could do.
Yes, don't take anything I'll ever say with any value. It's basically the point.
So, you started taking with the mission maker. You got into the missions, making them for the refugees. Started making them single player. Around that sort of time, I think from my perspective, it seemed like you were so going back to your start of your perhaps working with other organizations like Heatblare. It seemed like you perhaps was making an F-14 campaign, I'll say for your own benefit, for the love of it, or maybe you had the aspiration to put it on the market. And I did a couple of voice lines for that. Is that?
Yes. Yeah. So essentially, the first quote unquote bigger project that I started, that it wasn't just a single mission, was a campaign for the F-14 that I started working on, got fairly far along with. It was the F-14 in Operation Allied Force, so around Kosovo. The reason that kind of stagnated is because of some real life stuff that came up, and I essentially didn't have the time to put into it, because it turned out to be a much bigger project than I had initially hoped. And by the time I was kind of like picking it up again, then that was the time where the F4 kind of came up and testing started. And the decision I made in the end is that because of the scope of that campaign, where it being meant to be historically accurate, or at least based on history and to a certain extent, or as much as possible, the scope of it very quickly grew. Whereas now I have the opportunity to do something that's, from a technical point of view, smaller scale, but I think will still be hopefully as engaging, which is an F4 campaign. I'm hoping to make something that is, or working on a campaign now that is not 100% historically accurate, because I think you can kind of paint your way in a corner with that. But more, roughly based on and set around the just after the Yom Kippur War.
Right.
Just again, I think it's a really interesting history and really cool from an aviation point of view. But if you're trying to make a mission that is 100% historically accurate, it's very easy to quickly go into minor details and have it essentially end up huge. And then the problem there is the AI can be troublesome, let's say. So the more AI you have in a mission, the more difficult it gets. And with historically accurate missions, at least for the Allied Force stuff, you would need a lot of it.
Right. So there's no way to stop. There's no way to ensure that your units that what they did in real life will do what you tell them to do, and therefore they'll be breaking the immersion.
Yeah, I mean, DCS AI, when it comes to mission making, at least in my opinion, is you're like loosely steering a ship, if that makes sense, or like a big ship, small rudder, where you tell them what to do stuff, but to do things really accurately, or like have it be exactly at a certain point and at a certain time, it's possible, but it's just very involved. So when you basically can pick the scale of your missions by making it a little bit more fictional, you can reduce the amount of work by still having it be a little bit more cinematic, which also kind of leads into, in my opinion, a mission that is smaller scale can be more interesting from like I don't know if it's cinematic, but you can do more voice work that's about a certain person. You kind of get to know the wingman, whereas if it's a huge mission and everyone's just a small number in it.
Well, this is the contentious point then, at least in my mind. Are you violating brevity in this for the sake of narrative?
Well, one thing that is kind of helpful with the F4 is that, at least during the Yom Kippur, from what I can tell, I've been told by some wizards, is that brevity wasn't really set in stone all that much yet. So you have a little bit more leeway. I'm obviously, like, when I'm writing the scripts, I try to, I've sent you a bunch of stuff to double check if it's somewhat accurate. I think there's a balance with these things.
Of course, yeah. Especially from I mean, maybe it's not a million miles away from the movies, because we could all watch Top Gun and love it. But the more you know about, neither of us, I don't know if you are. I'm not a pilot. Are you?
Nope. I'm not.
Right, yeah. So neither of us are pilots. So our knowledge is limited to what we can find out either from publicly available sources or what if we find someone who is credible in that regard, then what they're willing to tell us. and we wouldn't want anyone to tell us anything they're not supposed to tell us. So, from our perspectives, watching something like Top Gun, we pick out things, at least I do, where it's like, oh, that wasn't quite what they do, in inverted commas, because obviously we're not that credible, so who are we to say what they do? But at least like it seems that way. So you've got the audience there, where the more they know about something, they start, what they want in that movie starts to differ from what an average person who's got much lower interest in that area would want. You know, like you could show a radar screen with an air-to-air picture on it for 10 seconds, and then maybe most of us would be like, okay, I understand what this person's facing, whereas, you know, your average Joe wouldn't. So do you find yourself sort of making decisions along that, going like, well, these guys wouldn't, like when Tom Cruise is describing G-forces to all the Top Gun grads in Top Gun 2? You know?
Yeah, I mean, a thing that really came to mind with Top Gun 2 is when I watched it. I was impressed at first that they had a real F-14 cockpit that they sat in. But then there's the insanely small details that no one cares about us, I guess. Like, I think when he said, I'm turning on the radio, he actually turned on the TID. Stuff like that. Or the HUD being, you know, like roughly in the right ballpark, but completely wrong. It's always a choice of like, okay, who's the audience for this, and how much do you need to dive into the details? I think very clearly, like the DCS community is not the audience for Top Gun. And when you make something for DCS, even then, you know, there's campaigns that are, I don't want to split them up by saying they're more casual, but there's more hardcore ones, or ones that really focus on accuracy. And the Baltic Dragon ones are an obvious example of that. I think Reflected as well. I can't remember the name right now, but there are campaigns that are a little bit more approachable. What I would like to aim for is something that's somewhere in the middle between those two. I think Cold War / F4 stuff lends itself better for that as well, because, you know, some procedures weren't really set in stone that much. So that's, you know, on that spectrum of, okay, this is Ace Combat versus this is a Baltic Dragon campaign. Obviously erring towards the accurate side, but still decently approachable, I would say.
Okay. It sounds like, to skip back a little bit, it sounds like the campaign you were working on for the F-14 that I mentioned, I did some lines for. It sounds like you springboarded off of that into sort of really good next steps, but it also sounds like it's now in the bin. So like, was it something that you learned a lot from, and then you go, okay, well, you know, put a lot of time and effort into that, which is now it's not going anywhere, but you're in a better place? Or are there, like, have you just transformed that into something else that you can sell? I'm
not sure. Right now, like, all of the mission making focus I do is on the F4 campaign, which it's, I think, hard to gauge, but the mission making part is like 75% done, you know, voice acting. One of the things that I learned from doing the F14 project is that I actually like to do voice acting towards the end. So I make the mission with basically temporary dialogue, and then at the end I replace it with the real things, because the dialogue kind of changes depending on certain things that you might find during making the mission. In that sense, it's right now, I guess, officially in my mind, it's on hold. I might never return to it. If after I've done this F4 project, there's something else that I would love to do much more, then I'll probably do that. But I still want to make F14 content, because I do think it's one of the better modules in the DCS. But it's, you know, remains to be seen kind of thing. If anything, I learned enough from it that it's making the project that I'm working on now a lot easier. And in another way that kind of comes into play is that I use a lot of Lua for a bunch of stuff, maybe more than other mission makers. So like I've made a framework for playing dialogue, for example, that I've fully developed during the time I was working on the F14 project that I'm now using for anything.
Okay.
And there's stuff like BDC, and I'm hoping to get the LANTIRN scripts. I'm not sure if I ever publicly showed that off. But essentially with the F14, it's possible to tell where the targeting pod is pointed through Lua. And I haven't kind of transplanted that into the F4 yet, but I'm hoping to be able to do that. But I think kind of niche stuff like that makes a difference. Having it be nicely approachable, and in the end, like more F4 content is more better. So
you could even have it where someone will be going like, yeah, move the pod to the left a bit, up a bit, because you know where the pod's looking, and probably how far that is off line of sight from a particular target.
Exactly, yeah. So you could have a thing where you have to find something, right? Right now, I think how a lot of campaigns rely on is, okay, look for the target at blah, blah, blah. Then you look for it with your targeting pod, and you're expected to like press spacebar or press a certain button to then tell the mission that you're looking at the thing. With this script that works very reliably for the F14, but I haven't got it to work on the F4 yet. Well, I haven't put much time into getting it to work for the F4 yet. You can just tell, so the basic script I did there is if you're looking at a certain target within a certain zone for over 2 seconds, you're assuming that the player has found, stabilized at looking at the zone. Then, you can do whatever you want, play a trigger, play some dialogue.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff.
It was better for immersion, but there is always going to be that small chance that someone left it on that target for 2 minutes without realizing, or 2 seconds without realizing.
Yeah, that is, I think, where a challenge of making DCS mission comes in is when something doesn't go according to plan. It can be difficult to communicate that to the player. So, like sometimes you see a lot of bug reports that basically are the result of the player not following along with the mission. So having clear failure conditions is very important, and that snowballs very quickly. In the end, I think you're always kind of expecting the player to follow the instructions. If that makes sense. It's unavoidable, but it's unavoidable in any game, right? Especially when it's as open, like an open world like DCS.
Do you feel that? Where do you feel like that sits in the wider area of games in general then? Because obviously video games are multi-billion, insert currency here, industry. And therefore, people put a lot of thought into it. And there's games designs is university courses now, is probably masters, is probably PhDs. Do you feel that the campaign area, particularly, or the as a transaction, you can buy missions, you can buy campaigns. Do you think that is lacking in game design fundamentals? Perhaps because the people who do it are hobbyists and technical people who have the ability to make a mission, which is not an insignificant amount of ability to use the mission editor and Lua, as you say. But do you think there's a gap where people who actually get the basics of game design and how to walk a player through something are missing or underrepresented?
That's a good question. I think difficult for me to ask because, I'm not a game designer. I'm not going to pretend I know a bunch about game design, but I think hopefully most campaign devs think about these things. I think there are challenges that are fairly unique to games like DCS, but Arma is another one that comes to mind. When it comes to applying these kind of game design rules of kind of in a way steering the player towards something. But in the end, there's a huge amount of talented people in the community, especially for multiplayer stuff. It's insane what some people have achieved. So I don't think that there's a lot of people that have really good technical knowledge but don't really know much about the game design parts of it. I think it seems to be a good balance of both those things.
Okay. Well, I'm curious about if we sort of if we're stepping through your timeline from getting into mission making the F-14 campaign. In my mind, but you can correct me, is that when you started to have more conversations and get more of a quote unquote in with Heatblur? I'm curious about how that began.
Yeah, it began with the F-14 campaign. That's one of the ways that LANTIRN script came to be.
Well, they helped you with it, or you showed it to them and they were like, we should talk to you more?
It's been a while, but I remember talking to one of the devs about it, and how it would be easier to access that data, because you essentially want to get the orientation, which you can do using the animation state, but because it's kind of a strange, there's a roll and a pitch, it's not XYZ coordinates. It's a little bit more cumbersome to do it, and not as accurate. So I talked to him about it, and he's like, "Oh, okay, we can probably just export the orientation as a unit vector, and have that be accessible via Lua." And then so he did that, and then I made that script, and then kind of ended up not really using it in a release thing. But hopefully that's coming. And anyone can do this, by the way. I'll public, or I'll make the video public, and I'll send it to you so you can put it in the doobly-doo or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, I guess check in the description if you're interested to find out how to know where the F-14 targeting pod is looking.
Yeah, I've not seen people really use it, but maybe I've got probably a huge blind spot in the multiplayer world.
Apparently, everyone on DCS plays single player. That's what I'm told.
Yeah, so I'm really curious to see what that balance is now, but I don't know.
Yeah, I wish we could see some, and I haven't looked, so maybe it's out there, some sort of sales statistics, because if, for example, I'll pick what I think is a popular campaign just because I've played it, and the initial Raven 1 sort of campaign 1, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
Like if that sold 1 million licenses, and there are 1.5 million DCS players, and the peak sort of unique users on Just Dogfight and all these other big multiplayer servers, you'd start to get an idea about where the player base is, and I'm sure ED know.
Oh, because, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm curious, because then it would. I've said this on another episode, and I guess you can respond to it now. But it just feels like everyone plays multiplayer, but that's probably because I only speak to people. If you don't play multiplayer, why would you come into a Discord server about playing multiplayer DCS? You wouldn't. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, the people that I know who play DCS play on multiplayer because I know them from places where you play multiplayer DCS.
Yeah, it's very much a bubble. I think there's 3 bubbles where obviously single player only people. I think ages ago ED said it's the majority, but I don't know. Then there's like public multiplayer servers. That's a kind of a world that I stay away from. I've had some fun on it, but it's not really for me. Then what I really like is the stuff that we do with refugees or with Scrum or whatever is like relatively small scale, more structured missions. I think we can really only see the last 2 bubbles. When you look at the multiplayer server browser, you see an insane amount of them. Most of them are empty because they're like a server that some group uses maybe 1 day a week. Just looking at the public servers, it's grown a lot from what I vaguely remember, but it's not huge. I'm fairly sure that IL-2, when that was in its peak, had a much larger player base in public multiplayer servers than
there's a pretty
for
steep
this
drop off, isn't there? From probably 5 big ones, big servers, and then the rest are
exactly
single figures or less.
When you compare it to something like Arma, where there's a bunch of like fully filled servers that are fully filled for the majority of the day.
That's a good point.
It's hard to tell, but then you look at the amount of groups where people do like the more squadron based flying, if you want to call it that. That's a huge amount of those, so that must be
that there would be a feature that I would love to see. Would be some sort of virtual group register in a way. I mean, it would have to. Then you'd have to have the sort of social aspect monitored through. Like, it would all have to go through like the actual program, because obviously Discord is an entirely separate entity, and so is Reddit. But it would be very interesting to actually see how many there are and at what number. But then also, it would be great for new people to be able just to see, or here is a list of, something that isn't just like a 2-year-old Reddit post, a list of all or most of the Discord groups, so that they can see time zones and milsim levels. You'd have to have some sort of scale for that, wouldn't you?
That could be a cool thing for the launcher that I showed off the other day, where it seemed to have, because I wanted to do liveries, I think, in it, right? So that's kind of integrating with the download section of of their website. Maybe it could kind of tie into a forum style thing as well, where you have groups and everyone can kind of post whatever giant list of the all groups, and everyone can kind of advertise, and you look for one that fits you.
Yeah, it'd be good if they could do it, and also interesting to see, like, if there was 50 huge ones and then a big drop off, or are there literally thousands? Like, the player base could be enormous and we just don't know.
Yeah.
What was I going to say from that? It's okay. So you started talking to Heatblur in regards to you basically desired for a part of the F-14 to exist that you could use, and they started to work with you on that and help you out. And then the end result is one where, well, why don't you describe your current relationship in terms of what you do for them, and obviously there's probably groups and channels that aren't public that maybe you don't want to tell people exist, but I'm just looking for a sort of quantitizing in somehow of where you are with Heatblur now, so we can talk about the route in between.
Yeah. Obviously I need to think about what I can say, because it's no secret that that Heatblur has a tester team, right?
What? You mean they don't just make it?
Things are tested.
They just write the code once, press compile, and then up the ships, right? Isn't that it?
Yeah. I'm sure
they copy it all from.
Was that easy?
They copy it all from. I'm not a developer, so what's the website where everyone goes to look up their
Stack
code?
Exchange? Yeah.
They go to Stack Exchange, search for F-14, and they copy it all, paste it all in, right, to Notepad++, and then they go, right?
Yeah. Or you just ask ChatGPT when you're not sure.
That's it.
Pretty much how it works these days. But yeah,
ChatGPT watches Top Gun.
Exactly, yeah, and then make me the Top Gun module for DCS, please.
In the manner of go on.
Yeah, pretend you're my grandmother who used to be a DCS dev. She used to tell me stories of how the F4
and also napalm. Yeah.
Well, if only ED would query ChatGPT for that, that would be a dream. But yeah, they test stuff. I started with the campaign thing. Started also helping testing stuff. For a long time, probably did more testing than really campaign making. And now I'm kind of going back in because the F4 is now out. Also still testing stuff and making missions. And like I said previously, fairly early on, they approached a bunch of the people that are, like into mission making that I have a relationship with, to make missions that will be included with the F4 on release. So that's when I made a mission that also kind of snowballed, but I'm happy with the results. The only thing I would like to still make for it is a co-op version, because that is, in my opinion, also kind of a blind spot where there's not that much, like, 3 to 4 player co-op content out there from developers or from ED.
I think you're right, actually, now you say that, because we did some, didn't we? But the F-14, it was something, Cage the Bear, right?
Yeah.
Cage the Bear?
Yeah.
Someone released Cage the Bear where you could do a 2-ship. And we played it, 4 of us, 2 crewed F-14s, and we had a great time. And even some of them, as I recall, some of them even I had to make co-op. Like, it was because it wasn't a paid campaign, you had access to the files.
Mm-hmm.
I think, isn't that right? With a paid campaign, they're encrypted somewhere, and you can't just edit them and share them, and I guess that makes sense. So because this was like an included campaign or a download, or it was like, here, download the co-op version, so something like that. So yeah, and we had a great time, as I recall. So I think that's a good point.
And I remember the missions being not hugely complicated, but because you're doing it with even if it would be a single aircraft, and you have a human wizzo, and then a second aircraft potentially, that just makes something that goes from like a fairly simple, okay-ish mission to really fun. So that's something that I would like to explore, but it's also it has technical issues because there's a lot of features that that a lot of campaign devs rely on that simply don't work in multiplayer.
Yes, yeah. But as another good point you raise is often the complexity can be overdone in an effort to make something, I'm going to guess, engaging and fun or realistic or and you never know where the player's looking, and that's looking through a teapot and F-14, and they can miss all your fancy stuff. Whereas, like the amount of times we've been using Olympus and then found that just massively overdone it. Like, just send 2 F5s after that 4 ship of Eagles. They'll have plenty of fun trying to shoot them down. Simplicity is often the way to go, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree. In that sense, Olympus is a really good tool because it's real-time mission making, right? So you find that balance of, like, am I overdoing it? Am I not overdoing it? Much faster than you would be able to with a mission that you just put out to people, and then the response is either they enjoyed it or they didn't enjoy it. You're lucky if you get feedback that is more specific than that.
Yeah, there's almost a gap in there for the instant action missions. It's not maybe that's not what I'm talking about. I've used them once, so I can't remember the name. There's that ability to like quick generate a mission. It's probably a forgotten feature now, but something like that where all it does is gives you a start and end, and then sets something to come and try and shoot you down in between. Like that would, if that was co-op, that would be, you'd get loads of fun in there, wouldn't you?
There is also the fly with a friend feature, which is essentially multiplayer missions, and you just click a button in the main menu and you start a server that then someone else can join. There's just not that much content for it, which I think is a real shame. I think that would be really cool. So I'm keeping it in the back of my mind with the F4 campaign. I think right now there's distribution issues where the way that you mentioned a campaign or single player campaign is encoded. I don't think you can host them, so it would require changes from ED side as well.
Maybe that was it. Maybe that's why they released them on the side, to allow people to host them.
Yeah.
I wonder if it has to be driven from ED themselves, because with you as, like, take you for example as a mission maker and a campaign maker, you're probably going to make the campaigns and missions that interest you, that you find to be exciting, that they say make the movies you want to watch, probably make the campaigns that you want to play. Whereas if I said to you, hey, script it for me so that that thing I described earlier, take off somewhere, someone's gonna try and shoot me down, go and land, that's probably not that exciting for you. Do you know what I mean? It probably needs to come from ED themselves rather than the creative individuals such as yourself.
I mean, yeah, like if you make any content for a platform, you're restricted within that platform, right? So I kind of see a narrow way through of making a co-op campaign. So a bunch of features that I alluded to earlier that a lot of campaign devs use, I try to stay away from, because in the back of my mind, I want to make it co-op, because that's what I enjoy the most, playing it.
Right, okay.
Because like the actual times that I play DCS, when I'm not making missions, the majority of it is still multiplayer. And then I prefer the ones that are like relatively small scale the most.
Well, community, I think, is absolutely key. From my own perspective, I would play a lot of stuff. Like we're going to get to for everyone watching, we're going to get to the F4 in a minute, right? Calm down. The F4 is not that exciting a module for me, right? Still bought it. And I was probably the most amount of hours I've logged on any of the modules in the past, 3 weeks, however long it's been since it came out, is the F4 because of multi-crew.
Yeah.
Step one. And step two, because I'm in a group of people who care about it, and and these are people that I enjoy spending time with, and we jump on and play. Like, if you released, like some of us have been talking about, it's not called Bomber Crew. That's a different game. It's the Micro Pose one, the Mighty Eighth or something like that.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
There's two of them. There's the Mighty Eighth, and then there's another one, and one of them's VR and one of them's not. But it's like multi-crew World War II bomber, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of that sentence, I care much more about the multi-crew bit. Like, yes. I'd still be playing a lot of that Wolf VR submarine game if we could arrange times to do it, and I didn't have to like reach around in my tiny room to try and press switches and end up punching my computer and putting a hole in the case. I don't know. I've lost my point completely, but the point I'm getting at is I think that's my perspective on it, and like most people, I probably think everyone else is the same. Like, there's a few geeks who probably find online and joining communities very intimidating, and we have the Grim Reapers. Therefore, if you're a woman, you basically got everyone asking your personal questions as soon as you jump on an online server. I can understand there are people for whom trying to join a community is either intimidating or off-putting and stuff like that. But, it feels like, from my perspective, multiplayer, multi-crew, got to be where it's at. It's got to be.
Yes, I agree. I guess kind of by coincidence, the two most recent eBlur modules, probably not by coincidence actually, but I don't know, have been multi-crew. I am most excited about aircraft that have multi-crew, even though you can obviously do multiplayer in single-seat aircraft. The Eurofighter Typhoon doesn't interest me as much as the A6. I like old stuff, but it's also because the A6, just having a dude sitting next to you where you're frantically trying to dodge SAMs just sounds like the best kind of stuff.
Although we did play a mission just the other day, didn't we? Where I was a Wizzo in the F4 and Toby was my pilot, and neither of us knew how to freaking target find bombs. So, like, the actual effect wasn't that productive. We had a good time.
Yes.
Which I guess is the main thing. And like, I knew a little bit more about it than he did, but I was also trying to Olympus the mission. So
right, yeah,
we were both having helmet fires separately.
The key is that the real mission is the friends we make along the way. So
yes, exactly. Yeah, and it is.
Friends, yeah.
So we were talking about to what degree you're involved with HeatBlur now. So you're on this incredibly this scoop that we've got now that there exists a testing team within HeatBlur.
Yeah.
Which almost sounds sarcastic, like I'm saying like all HeatBlur stuff's buggy. That wasn't what I was trying to suggest there. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you said, "Oh, there's a testing team in Eagle Dynamics," it would be like a joke about all the bugs, wouldn't it? That's not. Yeah. To be clear, I'm not insulting the quality control in HeatBlur. What can you say about what it means to be a HeatBlur product tester? Because there's like this sort of trope about, I wish I was an Xbox tester. That would be the best job in the world, when really that means walking into a room 50 different ways for the entire day to try and find, if I walk in this corner and turn around 3 times, do I clip through the wall and break the game? So is it you you as a aviation enthusiast going, great, I get to play with the F4, this is awesome? Or is it, well, great, I've got to press every switch in every other combination of switches to see if one of them crashes my computer? Or can't you tell me?
I have to. I'll have to think about what exactly I can say, but the gist of it is, and not because this is like some insanely well kept secret or something. It's
Well,
just,
you've got relationships to maintain. I appreciate that.
yeah, and it's an agreement that generally stuff that stays within heat-blood testers stays within heat-blood testers. It's like you're basically looking for issues with the product. The way to find those is by playing it, like you would when it's released. And then the big difference there is what makes a good tester, I think, is having like nicely detailed reproducible issues, nicely detailed bug reports. And sometimes there's, okay, this new thing has been introduced, we now need to focus on this. But in the end, you're just using the product as an end user would and looking for issues.
Okay.
And then it's always the classic on day one, someone does something that I guess you just never thought of, even though it kind of makes sense, and they found some insane issue.
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear what the community kind of thinks about how buggy or non-buggy a release of BF4.
Okay, well, that's a nice enough segue. I did make a couple of notes, and I did share them with you. It's not very detailed, and it's obviously my own perspective. The release seemed to go pretty well, I thought, in terms of releases, and we are getting beyond, it feels like, the era of DCS where on initial release it's barely functional. It seems like we're getting past that. So to say that the F4 had a uneventful release, it's certainly a compliment, but it's not as big of a compliment as it perhaps used to be. Some people reported frame rate issues. It seems like that perhaps might be something to do with the perhaps CPU spec and in cockpit simulation rates.
Yeah.
And there was a few things that seemed to be and obviously, like we know more things are going to come out, and we're not going to get an entirely complete module on release, but it seems like there's a few things that they were talking about. Like there was some image of some amazing program being shown on a browser in cockpit that doesn't seem to be a feature you can get a hold of now.
Right.
Do you know what I'm talking about?
I think in general, it felt to me like it was all right. It's a little bit difficult for me to gauge because I've been looking at it for a while then.
I mean, I was being critical there. I was pointing out the things that, if I can list a couple of things that didn't go well, then really that means it went amazingly, doesn't it?
I suppose, yeah. The biggest issue definitely seemed to be the FPS, especially on like big multiplayer missions with a bunch of F4s flying around. The radar apparently caused issues. To my kind of like feeling the community side, that felt like the biggest issue, which I can definitely imagine. It's annoying, right, when you get your hands on a new module and everyone's flying it.
Yeah, there's nothing skill based about your computer spec. There are people who been waiting at this and chomping at the bit. It's favorite plane, and then they've only got a 150 quid CPU, and their day is ruined.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's always I think similar to how the F15 RIP, maybe RIP, maybe not RIP. I don't know. It's like a heavier module to run than the Spitfire, and the Apache is more resource intensive than most things.
Than the Huey,
yeah. So in the end, there's always that, and it's kind of part of pushing it further is that it's always going to be a bit more resource intensive.
I imagine behind closed doors there must have been a discussion or ongoing work to balance that, because it seems like if they could have, they would have made it even greater simulation, an even more in-depth simulation and more system-intensive simulation, because it seems like developers, they love the plane. Usually, it seems like they're really enthusiastic about the aircraft. They want to make it as accurate as they can, and they've probably got SMEs who are telling them this and that, and they think, right, well, if I just add a bunch more fidelity in here, then it will be just like the person says, and they're loving it, and it's like they haven't flown it in ages, and it's like they're back in the cockpit. There's a lot of incentive to go off the deep end in that regard. I can imagine as a developer, and I'm wondering if we're going to continue to see a trend in the same way graphics seem to get better all the time. Although, there's a discussion about how that's getting less useful and is tailing off a little bit. And then boom, ray tracing comes out. If that is the trend, if I don't update my PC in the next 10 years, probably I'm not going to be able to really play DCS to any useful degree. What do we think?
I mean, I remember DCS running a lot more poorly like 3-4 years ago than it does now. So
good point. Yeah.
In a sense, yes, I think the because it's like a insanely long period game platform where in any other game it would be replaced by another title. The minimum spec or the recommended spec is kind of a moving target. That makes it so it's probably a little bit frustrating for people that are very much on the lower end. To what you said with that they have to take considerations. Yeah, of course. I think when you're developing anything, you think about anything that's meant to be realistic or a simulation. There's always like how detailed can I make it versus how much resources does it use. What I can probably share there is I've a huge amount of effort goes into optimizing stuff. From what I gather from both ED and individual devs, I've done a bunch of benchmarking, and it's not just okay, let's run a benchmark at the end and see if it's acceptable. Like you continuously benchmarking stuff and making tweaks and stuff to make it run better and better to squeeze the last FPS out. Hi Nick, if you're listening. So I think that's the deal with any game dev is
okay.
You're always trying to optimize it as much as you. Oh well, good game dev should always try to be optimizing it as much as possible and taking consideration of how much detail I can add, similar to what we discussed with the like time versus the realism you can put into the campaign or a mission. It's always balanced with anything.
Well, with that in mind, then, with the sort of on the unknown distance horizon, stuff like Vulkan, and other optimizations that I'm sure they're working on, and optimizations we have seen, as you say, things have gotten better. Do you think that if fast forward a year or however long it takes, and all of a sudden DCS performs, let's pick a wildly optimistic figure for the sake of the example, 50% better. I've got 60 FPS now. A year from now, I've got 120 FPS. Do you think that the devs would just swallow that because there's two ways to look at that. One is, well, if it performs that much better, I don't have to spend that much effort and time and therefore money optimizing. And two is, as I said before, like if they want to make it more in depth and more complex, well, then they've got more headroom to do so. Do you think they'll just sort of step into that chasm and swallow it?
I don't know. I think in the end, yes, you could maybe make the argument that if something gets more optimized, now developers need to put less effort into optimizing their part. Therefore, it just returns to the same point. But then, eventually, if that happens, the performance will be so shit that they'll have to start optimizing again. So in that sense, that would be like a self-stabilizing system. I think everyone is always thinking about optimization because you're always going to have people that are running a game like DCS, which is really, yes, I call it a game. That's really, really quite difficult to run when you compare it to, the top 10 Steam games. There's always going to be people that have performance issues. And so you have to always optimize stuff as much as you can. And for people that are on the lower end, it means that now it hopefully goes from unplayable to playable. And for the people that are higher end, it be people that would see a nice increase in performance. Like I have definitely seen, especially with multi-threading, it was a huge difference. I still think, like a lot of multiplayer servers, big multiplayer servers, a lot of people get bad FPS.
Yeah, that is sort of the acid test. Get your settings the way you think it, and then jump into a full multiplayer set. Then F2 around the place and see how you do.
Exactly, yeah. And then, so I mostly play in 2D, even though I have VR. I rarely use it with DCS. That's also really difficult, right? Because now you have to optimize a game for, a user might be able to run it at under 20 FPS in 2D, but now all of a sudden he's going to VR, and it's barely playable. So that must be a real.
It's not just doubling the cameras. It's the way it's how much more it affects your brain if the FPS is low if you're in VR.
Yeah, I mean that as well. It's just. I mean, it makes sense that, again, not a game dev. It just makes sense that VR is much more resource intensive than 2D, right? So I guess it must be. It's probably quite frustrating for a dev to have, like you're tweaking your module, it runs beautifully in 2D, where you have a really nice balance between it being super detailed and running fairly well, and then, you also, by the way, you need to take VR into account. So
I want to just say that I'm not asking you these questions because of your connections with like Heatblur necessarily. I don't want it to sound like I'm sort of saying like, as a game dev, what do you think? Like, it's just because we're on the topic and I'm sort of like, asking the questions that come off the top of my head. So,
sure.
You're very welcome to just muse on it as an individual. Rather than try and answer these questions. I'm not expecting you to be authoritative as a game dev. This is just a chat. So I feel like I'm putting you in a hard spot. How could I ever know that, Lovo? Like, I'm just wondering how you feel about it.
No, it's mostly because like a good friend of mine is a game dev, and if he listens to it, I don't know if he will. I might get slagged off. So it's basically directly aimed at him. Yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly right.
Feel free to throw shade. I can put the banner back up again. It's not a problem. What we've got. The release was good. We've got an update on Jester, which, to be honest, I haven't played the F14 in a while. I don't know if it's if that's on there yet. Or are we still waiting for that to come out on the Jester 2.0? Is that
you mean Jester 2.0 for the F14?
Yeah.
No, that's not out yet. That's a plan, so from what I can tell.
It's out, but it's not got walked across to the F14 yet, which involves better. Well, I say better is might be a matter of opinion. A different UI and more in depth. There's probably a name for it, but there's a sort of a separate context menu now for stuff like. Like, are we going low level this mission? I don't know. You know what I mean? Right. Almost like conversation.
Just a dialogue, yeah.
Just a dialogue. Is that?
I think so.
The name for it. Which is interesting because I'm a person. Me as a player, I do not give the first crap about Jester. I wish it wasn't there. I don't like dealing with the UI. I probably wouldn't play the F14 or the F4 without somebody else because that's my preference. Like, I'd just rather be able to, hey, can you press that button for me, over the intercom than learn how to operate that system. So I guess and now I'm being expected to form an emotional bond with this guy in the back, what's going on? So I guess it's really just it's an aside for me. I'm not really forming an opinion on it because it's something that I've only messed with it on the first day it came out, and we were all jumping in to try it out, and I wanted to just be able to take it off first, basically. So I was in the front by myself, and I was having to deal with that stuff. That's just my feeling on it.
I think a lot of people probably, again, we only really interact with people that play a bunch of multiplayer, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because of what we discussed earlier, multi-crew is a lot of fun. I think a lot of people would prefer to fly with Human Wizard. It would be interesting to see how the single-player community feels about Jester, how it compares to flying. I think the F-15 would be a good example because it can do multi-crew, but it doesn't have to. Where you don't really, quote unquote, need a backseat AI. I think that Jester, it can only ever be as good as a really, really bad Human Wizard, if that makes sense.
I think it could only ever seem that way because of you're controlling a system which is speaking to you as a person. Like the most common complaints I heard about Jester in the F-14 was, why can't I get you to lock up that thing that I know is there?
Yeah.
Or you saw it, and the amount of fidelity you'd have to have. And I know they do. I know it's clearly a lot of work, and I can appreciate a product. It's no one else has done that to that degree, to that level. So kudos. I'm not saying it's a piece of crap. I'm just saying it's not for me. But the amount of work you'd have to do to make it be able to respond to any given situation, when the amount of variety of situations you have, it'd be impossible. And people not understand how to use it, or you're saying, okay, you saw that thing. Why, when I say lock bandit in front, are you saying unable? And it's not able to convey, all the different options. Yeah. And if it was just a human, either it would have already locked it because it understands the context of the situation like a human can, or it would go, he's just notched us. I can't, he's beyond pulse,
Yeah, I do think in that sense, particularly the radar example, Jester version 2 and the F4 is a lot better. And the fact that you don't have to dive into the menu to tell them, because the context aware buttons are the majority of how you would interact with them, right? I do think it's a big improvement. I think I've experienced a big improvement in the experience, I should say. I also still agree Human Wizard. Prefer a Human Wizard. I think everyone still would in the end, if you're into playing stuff with your friends, because it's much better to have a mate in the back than a AI, even if he did everything perfectly. Which would then, of course, make him overpowered. It would still be more fun to have a human in the back. About the dialogue thing, right now, to me, it feels like it's... he asks very basic questions that don't really... I sometimes wonder, for example, like why does he want to know how high or low we're going?
Yeah. Did you skip the briefing? What's going on, man? Come on.
Yeah. So from what I can tell, or what I can gather, is it's kind of the start of things, and then we could ask questions. Or I would imagine it'd be really cool if you could ask a question like, so he would know that the next waypoint would be a target. Let's say you're doing a certain targeting mode where you need to get a visual IP. When you get roughly close, he would ask you, okay, is the IP off our nose now, or can you steer us towards the IP? So then it would be more of a tic-tac thing, instead of him just asking you a question.
Emulating what would probably go on to some degree. Yeah.
Or like another thing that I think would be really cool is, the bombing calculator, where you tell him what your parameters are, and then there's a button that says tell Jester. I think it would be kind of cool if he asked you about that instead of you putting those numbers in. So he could ask you, okay, what are we dropping?
A bit like the guy did start on the F-14. It would probably be for people who... It could be useful for people who aren't as familiar, and you're basically getting walked through it like a wizard on a computer installing something,
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the bombing calculator is initially, at least, complex until I get my head around it. You know, like not all the options are needed all the time. You know, stuff like that. For me, what has occurred to me while you were saying that is it's something like, I don't necessarily mind if Jester's saying things, or if some things would add to like the feeling of a situation. You know, if you're, you know, if you are ripping at low level away from an SA3 that's shooting at you, you know, it could be quite tense, and he could add something to that. But if I'm flying low level and it pops up with an option to respond to him, that could be distracting. And especially if it's like giving me if I want to respond and I'm having to push a button, that to me like is a bit of a problem. I know there's options to turn it off, and that is, you know, the sane thing to have. So really, I'm not complaining about any kind of practical problem, because, you know, if I really cared that much and turn it off, it doesn't matter for me because I don't fly with Jester that much. But if I saw that, if I was on short final and he was like, "Hey, we do it," and then a little thing, you know, look this way to select that option, I'm like, "No, go away."
Yeah, you're short final, or you're about to drop a bomb. What's the fuel state? You know that.
Yeah.
I think the way I see it is that that feature's kind of like a foundation right now, and I'm hoping there's a bunch of plans with it where it will happen in a situation where it makes a lot more sense for that to be a conversation between the two, and it happens much less when it doesn't make any sense for him to ask you that stuff. But I guess we'll see, right?
Yeah, it's not fair for me to talk about it necessarily, because it's a product I don't want and don't like. So,
but I still think that that kind of feedback is probably much better than people just disabling it, you know, and never really talking about it.
Yeah. Like you say, you have to recognize the work that went into that. You know, I might not necessarily like a particular building and its architecture, but it still took a lot of work, and, you know, if it's functional and does what it's supposed to do, then, you know, still a good thing. You got more of a relationship with Jester than most of us, I think. I don't know. I don't think that's a sensitive subject necessarily. in that you've in particular the voice actor.
Right, sure.
I don't know. That's a nice little tidbit. I don't think it's secret. I don't think I'm embarrassing you by bringing it up, but it's a fun thing to share.
That's all, yeah. Basically, one of the perks is the missions that they asked us to do. I'm pretty sure reflected in Setlow as well. You know, the idea was basically if you have any lines, chuck them to the Jester's voice actor, and there were like a bunch of people that were really cool to work with and do voice acting with. The only reason I didn't ask you is because I didn't need any English accents. Otherwise, you would have been top of the list, of course.
Well, thank you. I mean, in my mind, as you were saying, obviously, like I have to assume that Jester is a professional voice actor to some degree. I'm presuming that everyone involved with it was, but if they could have reached out to a pleb such as I, then, you know, got to ask questions about this heat blur, this scrimping and picking up unprofessional actors.
I mean, the main thing that is kind of mind-boggling to me is the amount of lines that they had to record for that.
I can imagine it must have been thousands.
Yeah, so I like the voice acting. I can see why some people can sometimes think like, okay, I don't want you to talk now. Shut up, you know. I guess you can.
I've never heard anyone ever say about Jester that they didn't like the voice or thought that it was like any problem with the production quality or the performance. That bit is almost transparent, which means you've done it right. Like, you know, I have done voice acting, volunteer function for a couple of campaigns, one of which was yours, and it's non-trivial to do that. You know, you need to, like, I'm not saying that I'm good at it. I'm saying I've done enough of it to recognize when someone's good at it. And I've played enough campaigns where the person making it clearly had to reach out to their, and what I've seen when I've done this is that I happen to have been in a Discord and the person making it goes, can I have some volunteers? And they have to deal with the people who volunteer because they're not in a position to pay however much it might cost to employ somebody who's good enough to deserve a fee. So, yeah, it's just as clearly a talented voice actor, and it was put together well by the team that did that.
Yeah, for sure. It's really easy with voice acting to get something that sounds okay, but then when you put it in context, it sounds completely separated. It's incredibly, like, oh, there's this guy pulling 6Gs and he's just saying, oh, blah, blah, blah. Then I see a tank to my left, blah, blah, blah. It's to get that final, like the last 20% is to get that kind of, get him to strain a bit, basically.
Yeah, and then that involves understanding what that means, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What else? We've got some new stuff. We've got the grease pen. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
The ability to... It took me about... I was on about my third go on it when I realized it actually pops up in front of you. Because the pen section of glass is on your right side. So I pressed the button... I was like, oh, nothing's happened. And I moved the pen and clicked the mouse and moved the thing. I was like, oh, okay, I'm writing. And I was like, well, I can't see the cursor. This is a bit dumb. And I was kind of like doing it that way, just kind of guessing where my mouse would be for the next letter. And then I kind of went, oh, fuck, it's right. It's nice and flat in front of me, and I can just write it on here and it appears on the window. So
it would be cool if you could, especially, I guess, in VR, but I don't know if that's technically possible. If you could write it, by actually being your hand being in that 3D space. But there's a lot of hand controller stuff I'd love to see in DCS. Then I would actually maybe consider playing in VR more.
Well, I used it to note down the bullseye and the target coordinate.
Yeah, that's mainly how I use it as well. And the nice thing there is if you open it, so you click on the window, if you go to the F10 map, it's still in front of you, so you can look at the F10 map through it and then write coordinates down.
That is good, yeah.
I did. I wish it was on the left side as well, because apparently what a lot of people with the pave spike would do is that you set it to the 9 o'clock acquisition position.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah,
and then draw a circle, which right now you can't because it's on the 3 o'clock position. Maybe that's a change coming. I don't know, but that would be really cool.
Yeah, I mean, for something like that, you could even have it where it could be something toggleable. Press this button and the little circle comes up. Right. If there's one use for it, but I take your point. I like the fact that the pod will slew to the wing, and I haven't found a good use for it yet. But I do think it's cool. Like, I like the fact that you can cage it to that 9 o'clock position. It just feels. Like I can imagine in for like if you're in a wheel and cast or something like that. I don't know. I just like it.
I've used it the other day where I was whistling for someone looking for targets, and the pilot had spotted them, but I hadn't. So I told him, okay, put it like off the wing, kind of roughly. It was still a lot of looking around because the pod is very shit, and I love it. It's incredibly. It's not complicated to use, but it's hard to use well, if that makes sense. Which I guess kind of encompasses the whole thing.
Yeah, I think it's less. I suppose it's less intuitive. It's less clear what does what in terms of like it's early and the norms haven't been figured out yet. If you use an F16 or an F18 or F15 targeting pods, you can be reasonably secure about you can transfer skills from one to another because they all seem to work in the conventions, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Whereas like the amount of times I got frustrated because I would like I can't remember if it's half depressed or full depressed that makes it kind of like area track, for want of a better word, but they'd toggle between if you were in the 12 o'clock, if you're in the 12 o'clock position and you toggle, and so it toggles between where you left it and 12 o'clock position.
Yes.
And in my mind, that's like almost like a designate. So I'd try and like almost designate, and then it cages back to the nose. I'm like, but it's just a case of getting used to how it works. And whatever they've got set up for the controls there, because there's fewer controls, fewer things it does. So the few things you can do are spread across fewer controls.
I think the pave spike is probably the best example of their not really, or the concept of a HOTAS not really being invented yet at that time, or it's just about like coming into play.
Yeah.
Where it's the system itself is fairly simple, but interacting with it is a bit like cumbersome. Which another example of that would be the acquisition mode, right? Where if you're in a CAA mode, now all of a sudden your weapon select, your pinky switch selects which part of the sky you're scanning, whether it's left, centered, or right. It doesn't make any sense when you've
heard it here first. Heard it here first, folks. Dogfighting top tip.
Yeah. So to kind of make sure that everyone's on the same page, when you're in CAA, so that's first the pinky and then the AAR button. It doesn't.
That's where it's bore sighted right to the front, as if you're trying to like lock somebody up, right?
That's if you just press the cage button, and then if you press the nose wheel steering one,
then it will lock them.
One, then it will start looking for something.
Right.
If it sees something, it will lock it. So it can scan basically left, it can scan in the middle, and it scans to the right. Which one it is defined by your pinky switch. So if you set the gun, I think it does left. If you set the heater, it does center. And if you set the radar, it does right. Which doesn't make any sense, right? But they didn't have any more switches on the control, so they had to. And that's, I'm sure, after that they started to think, maybe actually we should think about the buttons that we put on there on the throttle and make it multifunction. So I think it's really cool that you can tell that it's like a kind of hobbled together system in that sense, because a lot of concepts just weren't invented yet.
Yeah. And what I was going to say when we talk about the pave spike, the bit that really blew my mind in a good way was the zoom animation, for want of a better word.
Right.
It happened and I was like, that's cool. I like that. That triggers something inside me. The little like kind of goes out of focus on the push in and on the rack in. It's like I was like, yeah, that's cool.
I don't know if I think the pod in the JF-17 has like a focusing effect as well.
Is it? Okay.
Where you can adjust the focus, but it's like a super modern pod. I don't even know if it does like. I guess that's analog zooming that you're talking about, right? It's not just
yes. It isn't just like a flick. It's not like a digital zoom where it just clicks in, and it's not as if there's like a lens element that goes like that, and then you're in a, it's as if there's a, like if you imagine a proper camera lens, and you're twisting the zoom, you get that in between, and they're simulating some of those, what happens to the lenses in between, I guess. I don't know if they have footage of it and they mirrored it, or they got smart people figuring it out. I don't even know if that's what happens in the real jet. I just like it.
I'm pretty sure there's a diagram somewhere. It might be in the manual somewhere where you can see like the optical, not the optical formula, but the optical setup of the thing. Makes me wonder how it works in modern charging pods.
And the video seems pretty good too. I mean, I tried to take a video on the last mission and I got a series of stills, but for the briefing of that mission, someone had made a video. So either there's a way to make a video that I haven't figured out, or someone just sequenced their stills together in an image. I'm not sure which.
That was me. So what I did for that is just flying while diving my camera into that into the display and cropping it in post.
Right.
Okay.
It looked good.
I'm pretty sure there's plans to have like to make the recorder actually like record proper videos instead of stills. I don't know why, but I really love like the gun cam type footage. So it's really cool to actually use that in a mission for reconnaissance. Makes me wish we had a reconnaissance plane. I guess maybe with the tarps for the F-14 when it gets actually modeled.
I agree. I do think recce is quite an interesting mission set. I think if you get beyond the point of flying in DCS where it's like, I want to pull the trigger and make things go boom, and you get a bit more in, which is nothing wrong with that, that's where we all started. If you get more into airmanship and route following, especially in something sequence of waypoints, then your ability to do probably a low level into an area, hit the correct place enough to get the target at the correct place in relation to you, so that your cameras, but that stuff gets much more interesting.
Yeah, it's a cool niche.
I'm pulling up a image of what we can expect from what the jet actually spits out, rather than when you're filming your viewpoint into a thing.
Exactly, yeah.
So the frame rate, it's not that bad, really. I mean,
I think it's once every 5 seconds, maybe.
This is us. We were trying to bomb that boat, and I was desperately telling the pilot to turn, because that crosshair tells me that we're looking off to the left, I think.
I think so as well, yeah.
And he was like, no, it's right on the nose. It's right on the nose. And I didn't know any better to know, okay, well, maybe the pod's skewed a little bit, and that is 12 o'clock. I don't know. Or maybe he was just pointing at a different boat.
I don't know. It might rotate when you slew it down. I'm not positive.
Then we swung around for another go. And this is one we actually dropped on, where you can see I'm like, I don't think we're pointing at the right boat, but I didn't know enough to say. And then we get a little bit of my radar screen as we were pulling away in a minute. Where are we? Apparently I took a million. There we go. Nice little radar screen.
Lovely.
Which, again, I find fascinating and fun.
I think part of that mission as well, to kind of answer that, is none of us hit the target, right?
I mean, define target. We were in the right square mile, I think.
Yeah, bombs were dropped.
We found it. We dropped at it. We did not damage it.
Exactly. And that mission with an F-18 would have been piss easy and fairly boring. But because everything's a lot more involved, I think it's easier to have fun in aircraft like these. That's why I prefer them. I know your preference probably goes to more modern stuff, but I like this stuff because it is kind of shit and harder to use than other aircraft.
I think I agree with you. That one for me was borderline frustrating. There's probably a sweet spot of if you were anywhere from basically competent, where you're pretty sure you're going to get it right, but then there's a bit of a question, to quite competent and we got this stuff down, we're good. Like, that's all fun. And I'm just at that area before that where I don't know if I'm doing it right. I don't know exactly how to do it right. And we might have flown all that way and missed. And it's because we didn't know what we were doing. And my brain always goes like, we should have checked on this beforehand. We should have talked about how we were gonna, that's just me as a person. I'm just before the cusp of being able to enjoy the crapness of the platform in terms of its capabilities, in the way that you said. So I agree, but I'm just not there quite yet.
Right. You need to know how it's meant to work before you can really have fun with experiencing how difficult it is to do an accurate bomb drop.
Like if I could just be like, it's the fact that the pilot and I, neither of us really knew what we were doing. If one of us knew, it'd be kind of funny because they go, you got to push that button. I'm like, which button? Like if it was at that level, it would be all right. But because we were both going like, I think, and the answer, well, either we, because don't tell Tony, but I did look at the tat view. Either it was just the fact that we didn't quite. It was the natural inaccuracies of the system because the bombs looked like they were going for a boat, but they were about 500 meters long, or we completely fucked it up. Like, it's one of those two things, and I don't know which it is.
Right. I don't. Because you dropped it in target find, right? If I remember correctly, what was it?
It seemed like target find. I was like, I made myself a little list of what bombing mode does what, and I was like, well, I've got a pave spike, and I should be able to see it. So let's do target find. And I'd written down a brief summary of what I have to do for each attack modes, which I did. But then I realized that it's not just about me. The pilot has to put the plane in the right airspace. We ran in once, and I was like, oh, fuck, we're not even at the speed and altitude I put into the bombing computer.
Right.
Spin it, and actually let me actually tell you what you need to do. Because I hadn't even told him. I hadn't even told him, like, the airspeed and the altitude. I realized when we were probably about 10 seconds from needing to drop. And then on the way back round again, I realized that he has no symbology for where the thing's pointing other than looking at the video repeater. And I realized that I had no idea how he had to set his stuff up in the front. Like, there was this question about the quantity selector, what that needed to be on. I couldn't answer for him because I don't know the front cockpit. Like, it was all these little things that were just because of our inexperience that were happening in that minute prior to drop, because we weren't paying. We were just being a little bit too lackadaisical about it to thought we should have thought about this before and answer these questions, So it made it quite a stressful like minute and a half. And I don't know, maybe if I cared a little bit less, I would have just been like, oh, this is silly, But on that given mission, I wasn't in that frame of mind.
Yeah, I think I'm honestly not even sure if a target find release like that with dumb bombs is anywhere near accurate. The only TC find release.
We took 12. I was like 12.
Okay,
maybe we'll be all right. But then I realized that I still don't know about the interval timings and what that means. Like 10 milliseconds, 50, like 600 milliseconds. Like, I don't know. I don't understand that stuff. Yeah, I haven't figured it out. Yeah.
There's a bunch of, because it's seconds, right?
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a bunch of math that you can do,
yeah.
or fucking tables probably. I get. No, I don't think the bombing table gives you the separation based on the interval. It's just the seconds that you put in. I just eyeball it all the time.
It gives you something to do with, because you can choose the center bomb, can't you? It gives you some stuff to do with that. If you want the thing that goes on target to be how many, the first or the fifth or the 10th bomb in the stick,
Right.
Which is all, for me as a nerd, good. My own the problem with the way I play and what I've just been telling you about how I feel about Jester, that means that if I want to go and learn this stuff, I have to find someone who has a free time.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Although I don't even know if you could do that in single player, because if I want to practice it by myself, I can jump in the back, but then I don't think I can make whoever's in the front in AI in single player fly an attack profile. So
no, you'd have to fly from the back seat, which would be a challenge.
Well, I forget you could do that. Yeah, good point.
With the specifically with the targeting pod, for now you can bind some controls in the front seat, so you can control it from the front seat.
Right. Okay.
That's probably the easiest way to learn it, honestly. Or even at all, use it with.
Yeah. Well, what I need is someone who's already done, probably with Jester, the bombing modes, so knows their bit.
Right.
And then I can jump in the back and do what I think I need to do. And if it looks different, they can probably tell me, But, it's about finding the time, isn't it? It's about, then all of a sudden there's admin involved.
So is your main focus just Whizzwing then? Or
Yes, because I've got, including you and some other people, some people who are enthusiastic about the F4. I'm mediocre on the F4, but I like playing with my friends and I like multi-crew. So I'm like, okay, I will support you guys and I'll have a great time. I'll just be a Wizzo. I don't really care about flying it. I'll be a productive member of the group by jumping in the back and having a good time that way.
Yeah, I kind of had a similar issue, I guess that's what you're describing, with the F-14, where I was basically Rioing mainly for quite a while.
Yeah, you were Rio Smee.
Yeah, which is I guess in the F14 it was a little bit easier because it's mostly air to air, and the air to ground stuff you can kind of do with, well, not really, with the
Well, there was a CCIP, wasn't there, without having to have the back person lock the ground return.
Yeah.
So you had that at least.
Yeah. So, but yeah, it's difficult to be a. It's a little bit difficult to learn a Wizzo main. Yeah, exactly. Because you have to for air to air stuff, you can do it all from the backseat because you just fly it. You have no clue what's in front of you because the visibility is absolute shite. But
yeah, were you there for my conversation with Tony about Torcons?
I don't think so.
Because the interesting challenge was the lack of forward visibility. So in any other jet, you would be able to have a reasonable forward visibility, and I'd talk the pilot's nose onto the Bandit or the Hostile.
Right.
But, plus or minus 20 degrees, I can't see shit. So I was talking the nose on, losing it and going right there in front of you, find them. And they wouldn't find them. Or, there were situations where they wouldn't be able to pick them up. And then I'd lost them as well. So I was talking us into being completely no joy. Whereas, like, what we've figured out, at least as a temporary measure to try, is talking them on to like the 2 o'clock, the 1:30, and keeping them there until the pilot has tally.
Okay, interesting.
Because if you went all the way over, you're rolling a dice or taking a chance that the pilot would be able to pick them up in the front canopy, and that front canopy is busy anyway, isn't it, with all about the bows and the dials and the stuff that they've got in front of them. So if you can't get the radar lock, we think it's better, at least in our current level of experience, to keep them at a fixed point and keep trying to talk them on, and don't put the nose on until the pilot actually has tally.
Right. Yeah. That's an interesting point because I only really thought about either talking someone on with the targeting pod or when you have a lock, which then it's easy. Just put the thing on the thing. Yeah, I think the F4 and the F14 are kind of different when it comes to like roles as well. Where not the the Wizzo is more of a just a guy in back. It's obviously important, but in my mind, the Rio was the commanding officer usually with F14s, and he has much better visibility. So in a way, it's easier to do that kind of stuff in an F14, I think, than the F4. But then using the radar is a lot more involved, I would say, with the. So in the F4 so far, I've been doing a fair amount of missions where I'm purely staring at the screen and I'm not really doing much talking on outside, I guess, because the screen itself is, at least I find it fairly difficult to spot targets well from a decent range.
Yeah, it's a challenge, but that's up my street. I like that challenge. Like one of the first things I figured out was the ability to turn the knob so that the thing you're locked onto, you can obviously get closure, you can get it to display altitude and aspect. So I like being able to like lock something, and it's like, well, is that an actual good lock? Flicking between those and seeing, right, okay, well, all right, actually, it's saying it's at 0 altitude, which is not immediately apparent with that radar or the altitude of your return, which is why I was quizzing you on what the little notches mean, and I've already forgotten what you said. Is that 5 degrees a notch or something?
Tenths of degrees, I'm pretty sure.
Tenths of degrees?
I think so, yeah.
Oh, God.
So, like, one notch is 10 degrees, the other notch is 20 degrees and 30.
Okay, tens of degrees.
Tens, yes. Not tenths, sorry. That would be a lot of notches.
Each one is 7.5 seconds of angle. That's what we're saying. Everyone go figure that out. But no, I like that stuff. I like getting smart on that. And well, the whole DCS thing for me is success through being better, like high skill ceilings. So it's all good for me.
How have you set up the like all of those knobs for the Wizzo? Have you like put that on the HOTAS stuff?
Yes.
Or?
I don't know if I can heave this thing around in a way that you can see, but I'll try. I've got it attached to a Monster Tech mount, which weighs about 10 kilos. Completely over-engineered, but I love it. Okay. Where's my camera? Can you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Right, so I use these switches here. So these two at the top, which are really just on or off, they're just two position. They are like 1 bar, 2 bar, and high G, low G.
Okay.
And then these ones down here are sprung center, kind of like 3 positions. Well, actually, it's sprung center from the top and toggle from the bottom. I use those to rotate the ones that are like aspect and whatever's next to aspect.
I see. Okay.
And then I've got something on the stick which does the radar mode if it's in like B scope, if it's in air to air, air to ground map.
Right. What is that, radar mode?
Yeah, I've got one as well for the manual closure, but I bound that before I really understood it. I don't think that's something I'll ever actually use.
No, you don't really have to use it that often. If you have to use it, I think that's in a some things not working mode.
And some of these rockers down here, I've got these set up for the increase decrease target lat long.
Okay.
Which, because look like it's all the way fucking down there, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I'm like this trying to get my eyes on it, because you got to, in VR you have to get it in the sweet spot to be able to make out what it says. At least I do. So if it's like I can't do that and actually read it. So I'm contorting my neck trying to do it, and I found that rather than doing that and then trying to use a mouse clicker on it, although for big changes I'll use the mouse wheel because I can just scroll that and it happens much quicker. For little changes, I can just hold down increment and decrement. I don't know what the word is for that. And that makes my life easier because it moves slow. So if I'm doing like 36, if it's like 36.8, I don't just have to like leave it in the middle. I can do the middle and a little bit more because it moves slowly.
Yeah. One of the like concerns I say concerns. One of the things I was a little bit not that looking forward to is the fact that it's not a HOTAS system. You have a bunch of fiddly knobs and switches everywhere. I'm not a big fan of using the mouse for anything really. I think it's a bit fiddly, especially when you're doing something at the same time, right?
So all of a sudden there's a lot of switches, right? Because they haven't had to condense it onto a HOTAS. Yeah.
So I made a button box that's basically a replication of the weapon selector in the front seat.
Of course you did.
Exactly. I went way too far with this. I would love to see more like button boxes that have a bunch of knobs like that from companies like Reupload and stuff like. So all this is kind of
I agree.
Yeah, modern stuff.
Especially with more modern like fabrication stuff, like iteration should be a bit quicker. Which is let's segue on to your other side business, because that fits in well. You've done some stuff with hardware, haven't you?
So you say side business, it's a passive income. I sell some models for joysticks, an F14 grip that you can, for just a model, so people can 3D print it, and one for MiG-29 and
really?
What else is there? HCU for the. I was going to make one for the F4, but someone. I should give him a shout out because his stuff is really good, and I think he's even made it free. But there is a guy out there, insert name here, that does really good, or has made a really good model for a 3D printable F4 grip, and then you can do the electronics yourself to have it work with a Warthog or something like that.
So if a person has access to a 3D printer, then they can either pay you or this person's released one for free, and then 3D print a grip for an F14 stick.
Yes,
and some other things.
The model that I have is mainly the F14. Sorry, is the one it's like €15, I think, just a little bit. It's not much.
And what would they do for the base?
So in the thing that you get is like a documentation about how you could either make a PCB for Warthog, but there's this kind of big, or surprisingly big to me, community of people that make their own gimbals. There's a bunch of really cool open source designs out there. Ulokeli is one that comes to mind. Of course, if you want to go really nuts, like I did as well, is force feedback. I built a VP Force Rhino, which is the design is quote unquote free, so you can 3D print the parts yourself, but it relies on these two motors and some really nicely made electronics that a guy sells. He also sells them like homemade, like a unit that you can just buy that I don't think is 3D printed, or at least only maybe a couple parts. The VP Force Rhino. And that's really, really good. The reason I built it myself is because I enjoy doing that stuff. It was a little bit more affordable, and he's doing really well business-wise, which means he has a bit of a waiting time right now.
As often happens, isn't it? You make a nice product, and then if you're a sole trader or a self-employed person doing these things, or maybe you just said you do it on the side business, and all of a sudden you've got a full-time 2 months worth of stuff to do. You know, these are problems for individuals, I suppose.
I think it's a really cool kind of side tangent of the simming community, if you will, where the guy, I'm sure, just started because he wanted to make a really nice force feedback stick that is just very difficult to get now. Basically, no company makes them, so he just decided to do it himself. And then because of 3D printing and that kind of stuff.
Does that look familiar?
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, the one on the left there is the VP Force.
So this, there's like a base here, and underneath it there's some, I guess this is where I can see some springs, but I guess there's motors in there too? Or is it, do you mean the one that's mounted here in front of the...
The giant box with the cogs, that's the VP Force Rhino, yeah.
Jeez.
It's
you see my mouse? Can you see it? If
yeah.
You can see it, people at home can probably see it. So this with it looks like it's an F-16, F-18
I'm
grip,
pretty sure that's the Wing one, by looking at the adapter that this guy's using.
Oh, we've also got a double screw here. So, like you said, there's an adapter in between the two there.
Yeah, because by default the VP Force supports. I'm pretty sure it's Virpil grips or Warthog grips. That the big thread.
And this is like an emergency stop button, which you don't often see on.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's. I don't want to say it's like dangerous, but it's a nice amount of force. That's why it's so enormous.
It's motorized machinery between your thighs. I think it's
you want
safe.
To be careful there,
yeah. Like better safe than sorry. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And then another cool thing that this guy, I'm not sure if he's made it himself or people that are working with him, is he made a really cool piece of software that takes the telemetry from DCS and then adds effects into the stick.
Yes, I'm familiar with the butt kicker.
Exactly, yeah. I think that stuff's really cool because you when you put the gear down, you can feel the vibration that your gear's going down. You can kind of feel if it's being iffy, if it's going down slower than intended or stuff like that. I really think it's cool that kind of stuff exists now because, I don't know, 5 years ago, I'm pretty sure it was nearly impossible to get a force feedback stick.
Yeah, I also love that stuff, and I hope it gets more attention because it's not just that Eagle Dynamics have to produce the information, the telemetry, but also the vendor. I think it's Hapti Connect do the butt kicker software. They have to write the software that then reads it, and then they have to then figure out how they're going to translate that into information on the shaker or rumbler, or I guess the motors in this case with the stick. So like the Hapti Connect do a thing for ground roll bumps, which is nice, but it's fake. Because that doesn't, there's no telemetry for that. There's no, the DCS is not as simulated to the point where it models the bumps in the taxiway.
Yeah.
And how that might propagate through all the gear and stuff like that, but it would be cool if something like that came in. But there is a bit of it's niche. It's almost niche within a niche.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And it's much more of a thing for, it seems, driving sims.
Yeah, that's actually something I kind of wanted to try. I noticed that someone was having a conversation with VR and driving sims. I'm not really into driving. I don't even have a car, but I think that would be something I could.
So you hate cars? I heard that about you.
Well, it's the Netherlands, so we absolutely. I live in the Netherlands. I absolutely hate cars because of that reason and nothing else.
Can I share that? Does that do thing? Okay, cool. Like, this is the Haptic Connect software.
Right.
And if you look at the games you can play, look, we got Truck Simulator, Assetto Corsa, Drive. There's DCS, Dirt Rally, Euro Truck, F1, Flight Sim, Forza, iRace, and Le Mans, Project Car, blah 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 blah. X-Plane.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, because that means there's other people who are contributing to the market and making that. If that didn't exist, Connect probably wouldn't exist. So it's not a bad thing. But
yeah, if it would only work with DCS, there's no way it would be a profitable business, right?
Yeah. But you can also, this button here is just an audio splitter. So you've got, the box has a high cut and a low cut, which you can customize, and then so you can just take the low sounds out of what the speakers are doing and turn that into a rumble. So there are options for if there is not telemetry in your software.
Right. Slight tangent maybe to this, but looking at that list of sims, right? How do you feel about BMS? I wonder. Have you ever tried it? Are you interested in it at all? Or
so this is what happened. I bought it. I bought Falcon. It's Falcon 5. Isn't it Falcon 5? Falcon something.
BMS something.
Falcon 4?
Yeah, with a bunch of mods makes a BMS.
Yeah,
something
so
like that. Sure.
So BMS is a community mod that sits on top of a game, which is Falcon number. I don't remember what number it is.
Yeah.
And I'm not explaining this to you. I'm sure you know. I'm explaining this to the listeners.
I'm sure people will be correcting us, because clearly neither of us really.
Yeah, let me tell you how I think it works. So I bought the game. This is what I'm trying to say. The game was on sale, but it wasn't BMS, because that's not how BMS works. It was the base game. I bought the base game, and I downloaded BMS, and I loaded the game, and I couldn't understand the UI at all, and I closed the game.
Basically,
that's my
exactly
experience
the same
with BMS. Is that what you did too?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And like
I appreciate DCS isn't that much better. I just know it. I'm familiar with it. I loaded this thing, and I was all like, the mission, and then there were a bunch of options, and I was like, is there an interaction? I just want to fly the F-15. Come on. And then, I give it 10 minutes, and it decided it wasn't worth it again, because if 15 of the refugees said we're playing BMS tonight, I probably would have given it a go, but it's not the community we're in.
I think it would be cool to maybe I'll try to dive into it a bit more, because I think there's some things about DCS that can be kind of annoying, and apparently BMS does some things really quite well. So I kind of want to give it a go, but it's the barrier of entry is fairly high from what I can tell. I tried it.
Yeah, I need some hand holding.
Exactly.
I think our mutual friend Tony is much more familiar with it, and we'd have to arrange something with him to say, hey, show us how this goes. But I understand the ATC is much better. I understand that I think he said BVR is better, and something about the existence of dynamic campaigns, but I don't know. I don't care that much. And I don't know what I'm missing. So the incentive's not there.
I think it would be neat to have a comparison, but it's a lot of time that needs to be invested into it.
I almost feel bad for him as well, because it's a community mod. I'm like, oh, come on, guys, charge something. I know you can. I'm sure there's places you can go to donate, but maybe people are saying the same thing about Olympus. I don't know. Maybe they love it and that's all what they want to do. But if you've made something that people still compare to DCS, which charges, $70 a module, then it's a shame that you're not taking a little chunk of that love,
Yeah, I always kind of secretly hope that a real good competitor to the DCS kind of pops up, and not that I want to jump ship or anything, but I think it'd be cool to have multiple options in the
it's a widely held belief that a little bit of competition in the sector would be good.
Exactly, yeah.
For a variety of reasons, I guess. I want to say basic capitalism, but basic capitalism is also why this is what happens in this is what happens. Like monopolies do exist in capitalism as well. It's both ways are still capitalism. So no, I don't disagree. But I'm in an armor group now as well, so my time is limited. And I was telling you, I'm going to be volunteering at the Yorkshire Air Museum, so time is going to be another factor.
I think if that does go well, and I really hope it does for you, then that'll be some cool conversations that can be had.
Yes,
for sure.
So the reason this came about, the LovoCast came about, is because I went to an open cockpit day at this museum and found, I was imagining I was going to walk into a museum where some of the cockpits were open. That's what open cockpit day. I like planes. Yeah. I'll go sit in some cockpits and think about how my knees would get cut off if I ejected. So I turn up and I walk in and pay the money, go into the first hangar, and there's a Harrier, and there's a guy in a high-vis jacket who's obviously watching the queue and making sure no one takes a milkshake into the cockpit. And I was like, "Oh, can I?" He's like, "Yeah, jump in." So I'm there in the Harrier. Oh, brilliant! This is the Harrier. Look, it kind of looks like it does. It's not a C Harrier. It's not a AV8Bs. It's a bit different. And then I went to. I think I went to the Buccaneer next, and the guy who was there was a guy who was sitting there and talking you through it, who had hundreds of hours flying the Buccaneer, and I was like, "Fuck the cockpit! I want to talk to you."
Yeah,
And I was going in the queue, and there were in pairs. There was a guy because he had stairs with a platform. They didn't make you climb like the little ladders. Right. There was a guy who was sitting there and talking you through a couple of things, and there was a guy watching the crowd, the queue, because they would get a little bit long, and would chat to you to make it go a little bit easier. And it turns out they were usually pairs of air crew. So I would join a queue, and I'd be like, "Forget these guys. I don't know what they're talking about. They're just here because they think it's pretty. Come and talk to me." And I would like chew their ears off for ages, and I really enjoyed it. It was fantastic, and I was like, I want to talk to these guys more. What's a good excuse? Probably having a podcast, because you see people doing it. 10% True, Mover and Gonki and FastJet, Firepower Podcast. They get people on and they have conversations. It's as good an excuse as any. So I was like, I'm probably not going to be able to just email this place and be like, "Hey, give me all the names of your aircrew," so I can contact them. I should probably go there and get to know them. What better way than volunteering? And also, I get to hang around cool planes. So this is a long game for this podcast. Like, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, "Just start. Like, why wait? Just start. It'll be fun. It doesn't matter if nobody watches." And I think he was absolutely right. I have enjoyed every one of these episodes so far, and it's been a good time. And doesn't matter if no one watches or likes it. One, because I've got other plans for it, and two, because this is how you start. You know what I mean? Like if you look at the big YouTubers, the Let's Players and stuff like that, you go back to the start of their channel, they were doing crap videos because they didn't know any better. They were starting out for like 5 people, and then, now they've got millions of viewers, and I don't think I'll get that far. But my point being is that not being immediately successful at something should not stop you from doing it. So here we are, and I'm going to be arranging an induction at the Air Museum. And I think I'm going to be working on Buccaneers unless they turn around and say,
cool.
Here are some other cool options. But Buccaneers pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you'll be able to see the pave spike because I'm pretty sure that's what they used on the Buccaneers.
They had a pave spike on one of them. Yeah.
Nice.
The guy, they have 3 Buccaneers, and one was in the Desert Storm. Desert Storm colors. It had a fake. He said paveway 2, which is I think actually the British terminology for like a GBU-12,
right?
So he that on one side, and he was like, "The other side's a paid spike," and over here, and I was like, "Okay, I guess we'll come back. We'll come back to that." I don't know if it could be a prop or something. I don't know, but so much just it's like a kid in a candy store kind of stuff, isn't it? It's one thing to look around it, and another to have someone who's been maintaining them for a decade-long career show you around something. We went outside to one, and it's the one because they try and keep some of the stuff in a live condition, which obviously I doubt it's air certified, but they keep everything going as well as they can. So he went to the tail. Underneath the tail is a hatch, and he like opened it. First thing he did was open the engine cover.
Right. Yeah.
Which clearly, he had that way where he'd obviously done it a million times where like, because it opens downwards, and if you just opened it, it would have fell open. So he kind of like had his like shoulder on it, and he popped the last thing and kind of caught it with his shoulder. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. And the engine was all there with like all it's like it was clean and shiny. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't rusty and had been sat there for years in the rain. It was clearly well kept.
Yeah.
And then he went under the tail, opened a hatch that he could literally stand into. He was crouching to get in there, and then like he was half inside the back of the jet from this sort of tail thing, where I don't know if he connected a battery or flipped a switch or something, I don't know. But then he went and opened the canopy with hydraulics, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And then he climbed up in there, and he sat down in it. He was like, yeah, and he like flipped the battery on, and all the lights came on, and I was like, probably quite a few people since the retirement of the Buccaneer who have seen what a Buccaneer cockpit looks like with power on. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, the lights in the way that they, we've all pressed the lights test switch on a cockpit in DCS and seen how it looks like, but in real life, the glow's a bit different and things are a bit worn. And like, I was like, this is probably quite a rare, this is already really cool. So, I'm looking forward to that.
There's this guy that does these F4 videos where he's working on one, I guess. I think they're trying to get it to a flyable condition. I think it's an F4D. Diesel Thunder is his channel name, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, check it out.
I think people love that stuff. So if you could really, in the end, it's just a bunch of mates having a chat now. But if you could extend that to that kind of content as well, I think people would absolutely.
I think so. I've watched videos where a guy unblocks a drain.
Millions of views, surely.
Oh, yes, almost certainly. And I've watched, so that's post 10. He does drains. I've watched Rebuild Rescue, where they're restoring a variety of general aviation jets. And there's stuff like the Bovington Tank Museum, and there's an Australian Army Museum I can't remember the channel name for, but they do like how to service your BMP-2. So, I completely, and they get tens of thousands of views within days. Like, so I'm just underlining your point, really. I completely agree with you. Like, I think that there's money left on the table at this place for all that sort of stuff. Not just an interview with the person, but even though that would be great, but then if you have open access to the aircraft, you can do a complete walk around. I think with isn't there like some aviation photography channel where he does like they did like a B1 walk around recently.
Yeah, I know the one you mean. The name, I can't remember the name, but yeah, he makes great one. There's the German guy that does like cockpit videos as well. He obviously gets access through
yes,
through Museum.
Eric Johnston is the guy with the B1
Yes.
walk around.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So that there is a lot of stuff out there for that. My impression is that this place isn't ready for that yet, just in terms of I would have to put together like a business what's the word we're looking for, a business presentation,
Right.
and be like, this is, look, you might not know, but here's what all the other places do. Look at what they're doing. Here's their Patreon. Look at what they're making.
Probably gets them a bunch of visitors as well. So yeah,
Probably
hurt, right?
increase awareness. But so that's sitting up there with the stretch goal. I think it's probably more attainable than can you tell me your Jaguar pilot that I can sit down with him, because there's extra stuff to do there in terms of like their availability. The booking is there all the time. If a year from now they've trained me to a point where I can do stuff by myself on it, which seemed to be what they were suggesting, then that mechanical side of it, here's the airplane, is probably a bit more within reach. It's exciting, but like I say, there's no failure really here, because if none of that happens, I'm having nice conversations with my friends. So what I mean? It's and it seems like it's a pretty, I'm not saying it's a done deal. It might sound egotistical, but in terms of volunteering at the place, it sounds like they are looking for volunteers, and I might meet the criteria. So there's I'll obviously try and contribute to them in a meaningful way, and I'll get to spend time with a jet. So I think that's likely to happen in that regard. And there's no lose, because if I don't let me film it, I still get to have cool individual experiences with aircraft. Yeah. So
I don't know if I ever told you this story, but another mutual friend of ours, Tim, me and him and another mutual friend, Tom, went to a museum, Duxford it was.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to the like outside. They have a bunch of big jets, and one of them was a BEA something, like 4 engines at the back, commercial liner thing. So we get in. It was basically deserted, and there's this old guy sitting in the front. We start, kind of looking in, and Tim, who's a business jet pilot, he starts talking to him and like asking more technical questions, like what was the cruise speed, blah blah blah. So this guy gives him a number like Mach 0.7 or whatever, and Tim, thinking he's a cool guy, in his biz jet says, well, we fly a little bit faster, 0.8 something. And then the guy kind of straightens up and he says, well, actually, I went Mach 2 regularly. And it turns out he was a Lightning pilot.
nice.
So and then like he opened the door, we could enter the cockpit that normally you couldn't really, and we had a chat for a good 20 minutes, it felt like.
That's
so
awesome.
I feel like a lot of the guys, well, hopefully for you, a lot of the guys will be kind of wanting to share their stories as well, because it seems like they're all there for like passionate reasons, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was, in fact, I can share something as like the way that we were just having conversations. Obviously, I asked them if I could film.
Right.
When I went to the open, I'm talking about the Open Cockpit Museum again now for clarity. But when I was there, I was like, "You guys will enjoy." I'm saying, "You guys, the refugees, would enjoy this." So I will film some of this for our benefit. And so I asked them, "Do you mind if I film?" And they all said, "No problem." Which is very kind on their behalf. But the way we were having just the conversations then was almost enough. Like, let me pull this up. Let me know if you can hear when I press play.
I can. Yeah, I can.
Swap. Forward. On the runners, there you go. That's great.
A big cramps for you as well. Maybe not so much for me.
It's different. I mean, more and more times got more and more stuff on there.
Look at that, linear.
Yeah.
Linear speeder.
You'd find that on the lightning as well. It's there's also that one there. That's the other airspeed indicator. That's the landing ASI, and that's for use for deck landing. So you look at that. That's actually
Right next to the AOA
indicator on there. And also you had the indicator.
So what you've got in these videos is me going like, right, I want to let them know that I'm not just a rube. Like I got a little bit of an idea, but also I don't want to like make it clear that I'm like someone who's read a book and thinks they know everything. You know what I mean? Like I want to do it in a way that they tell me more, but they tell me more of the more interesting stuff. I don't care that, oh, okay, that's the gear handle, great. You know, tell me the story about something, you know. So that this is like the sort of transition period where I go, AOA. I know what AOA is, mate, you know.
On there.
You see myself.
Your headset. Used to get noise in your headset from the AOA.
Really?
Yeah, as you came towards 20 units.
You should like the F4, I guess.
You get a beep.
Yes.
Type noise. You look at that, and it was there all the time. And it worked for any speed and any configuration. So as soon as you got what they call the steady note, you knew that you were getting the best performance on the aircraft. So you didn't have to look at anything else. You know, you park the front on the left-hand corner, put both feet on them, and just pull it steady note. Nice. Yep. You got
So much stuff.
Yeah, but it works as what they call a black cockpit. So all these crosshatch, these black and white things you can see. All of those indicators are simply telling you there's no power to them. Right. As soon as the car's on, everything's in the right configuration. Switches, those all go black.
Right.
So you're now using a black cockpit, essentially.
Yeah.
If something goes wrong with them, they either lose power, they go back to crosshatch, so you immediately see them, or they go white, whatever the problem is. Like those two at the bottom there, they're the oil. Low oil pressure. They would go if they went off. They would go down to white and say low on them. Yeah. And that applies with all the others around the. So whenever it's black, it's all sorted out. It's all there.
Quite large.
Yeah. Absolutely. Really system. Artificial rising system. Really reliable. Almost toppleable. So you can use that. You can fly at low level at night, 300 feet on that, and do full 4G 75 degrees angle of bank.
I understand they like to take these down low.
Yeah. They were happy down there.
That was a bad question. That was a dumb question. That was like I've read a book once kind of question. Like I'm trying to I do a bit. The next aircraft I go to is the Jaguar, and I asked a question that I thought I should have asked for all of them, which is like, have you ever had to pull this handle and point into like the emergency gear or something like that?
Right.
Which started to get some stories going. So, it's I suppose it's an exciting time, but I've got some stuff to look forward to. Yeah, I'm a lucky boy.
No, I really hope it takes off. No pun intended. Because I know I'd love that kind of content. So
yeah. Well, on that note, I suppose I've got two more questions for you, and then it's probably time to call it a day. Jesus, we've just gone over 2 hours.
Sorry.
No. This is how it goes. What's surprising is how the time flies. So question number one is, but either personally or in relation to DCS, up to you. What does the future hold for you?
So when it comes to DCS, the main thing that I'm working on now is the F4 campaign, the one that we discussed earlier.
Do you have a name for it? Is there a temp name or?
There is the folder is called. I'll tell you. It is very
final last one, final version. Really final this time.
It's literally called Phantom Campaign YK for Yom Kippur.
Right, that's right.
I'll have to come up
have
with
you decided? Oh, you must have decided which terrain, because there's two you could arguably use for that
Yes,
for that
yeah.
war.
Mhm.
So you've had to make a incredible decision that will obviously make or break map makers.
Yes, I chose to do Syria. The main reason there is that so Yom Kippur is obviously Syria, Sinai, and a lot of the fighting happened in Sinai, and then some stuff happened.
Summarizes the entire world.
Exactly, yeah. Some bad stuff happened.
The universe began, and everyone agreed this was a bad decision.
Exactly, yeah. The skirmishes that kind of happened after Yom Kippur, a lot of them happened in the Golan Heights against Syria. That is kind of what I'm kind of basing it on. So it's relatively small scale. Could do some more interesting missions and some stuff in Lebanon as well. The main gist there as well is that it's a little bit difficult to get Israeli voice actors. If anyone's listening, then please. And of course, Jester is very much not Israeli, so I think it will be a little bit weird to have a full-on your Israeli campaign. So what I'm doing instead is you're an exchange pilot that's kind of hopping along, learning
Clever.
what the Israelis learned. So in that way, it's part training. They're going to be missions where you're going to be learning these tactics that they learned during Yom Kippur, and then part of it is actual some combat missions as well. I'm aiming for maybe at least 60% would be actual combat missions, because training campaigns are really cool. They're very well done by Reflected, I think. So he's got that market cornered. Yeah. When that happens all depends on I guess this, the second part is real life stuff. I'm kind of trying to start a software company in the aviation business that's next to my main job, which is in R&D and physicist. So I wish I had more time, basically, but those both
in your life.
Yeah. DCS is the F4, real life is this company. Those are the two main things that I'm working on. Hopefully everything will go well. We'll see.
Well, that's exciting to hear. I hope that all goes well. The last question is one that I'm experimenting with, that I want to ask everybody, which is, what do you love to do?
So my main hobby is analog photography. Maybe this is why I like reconnaissance missions. So if I just want to relax, I tend to take an analog camera with me as much as I can. So that's my main hobby. And the button box thing, like obviously with the force feedback joystick, I like to make things as well. So secretly, if I had the time, I would love to make my own analog camera. That would be a really cool project, but again, time.
Okay. Photography could be landscape, portraits, still life. What do you have an area of the art that you go for that draws you?
I guess mostly it would be street photography if I'm not on a trip, and I kind of use the camera as an excuse to go somewhere and look at things that I'm also interested in, right? So when I like to, there's unfortunately not that many around me, but I like to go to aviation-oriented museums, obviously, and take a bunch of photos there. Or like the other day, I had to go on to a business trip somewhere, then bring the camera and take photos of whatever city I happen to be in. So it's kind of an excuse to just walk around and look at stuff. And if it's a nice nature area, then it's nature photography. If it's a city, then it's more like architecture, street photography stuff. It just depends.
Okay. Could you describe to us what comes to mind when I say your favorite photo?
You mean that I took, or in general?
That was my thinking, but I'll take whatever comes to mind.
Ooh, that's a tricky question. I want to say, I'm just going to open my Lightroom and see the first thing that my eye catches. Generally, I like kind of minimalist stuff. And maybe this is the photo that comes to mind, because it kind of sums up what I just said. This is a photo that I took of our mutual friend Tim when we were in Georgia. So we went on this wacky trip, kind of just to look at stuff, to look at Soviet stuff, and to take photos. Not like a real goal in mind. Some interesting bits that we wanted to have a look at. But to me, this photo. Hang on, sorry, I sent the wrong person. This photo is kind of encapsulating that. I like to travel and then document it like this.
Okay. Happy for me to share that.
Yeah, sure.
What to do? That one. Share. So what am I looking at?
So what you can see there is a wild Tim, and this is us standing on top of a hill somewhere.
He's enormous. Look at him. He's 3 buildings tall.
Yeah, overlooking Tbilisi, I think this is.
Tbilisi.
Sure.
Wow.
And I like the kind of vastness of it, and just seeing him isolated in the middle of the frame. Yeah. But it's picking your favorite photo that you've ever taken is like choosing your favorite child. So it's
it wasn't supposed to be an easy question or a question that is answered perfectly. You know what I mean? It's just almost like a thought experiment, if you will. It's really interesting. I like it. I like the depth. I can almost see like 4 layers here. We've got the ledge in the foreground. We've got the ridge with him on it. And then there's the section of these very sort of blocky apartment buildings, and then the sort of low hills with the aerial effect with the graying out.
Yeah, and it kind of that kind of captured the feeling there as well. You have this, Tbilisi is a huge city, all these very old commie blocks, but then we went for a drive into the mountains, and it's this beautiful, vast, empty space. So it is kind of gets all of that in the single shot. I don't take photos for the results. I honestly don't think I'm that good of a photographer. I really like using analog cameras. That's mainly why I do it.
So is it then more about like a person could say that there's a ritual in making coffee in the morning if they have a fancy machine, or a ritual in like sometimes I obviously I don't shave very often. I used to shave. I used to wet shave with I thought for ease of conveying it, a straight razor,
right?
Which is more complicated to do, but there's like a whole thing to it, and it almost becomes like a ritual. So is there something like that for you in the mechanics of it, rather than, like you say, it's not necessarily about the image? Is it about the mechanics of a camera or developing or something like that?
Definitely the mechanics of using one of those cameras, where it's because you could arguably take a quality-wise a better, sharper photo with a phone, but that's like pull it out, bam, you're done. Whereas with an analog camera, take your time. You only have so many shots. It's getting increasingly more expensive, so you kind of slow down.
You can take literally thousands of photos with a digital camera, can't you?
Which kind of devalues every individual photo. So, in my opinion, analog photography is kind of making a comeback in that sense to a certain extent, where you slow down. It's this. The camera I used for this is one that I rented, fully analog. The only battery that it has is for a light meter, and you don't have to use that. So it feels like a nicely made watch, I guess, for people that are into watches.
Okay. If you were speaking to a person who was quite interested in what you were describing, but literally knows nothing about analog photography apart from literally what you've just said, what would you say to that person in terms of sort of stepping into the hobby?
That's a really good question. I would say, honestly, it's more accessible now than it's been for quite a while because it's getting a little bit more popular. So, you can get a nice analog camera from eBay for less than €50.
Okay.
Buy a roll of film and just go out there and shoot. On YouTube, there's a huge amount of information on how you would do it technically, but it's not that different from using a digital camera. It's just that you have to take more considerations, take it a little bit slower, and think a bit more before you actually push the button, because you are throwing away one of your X photos that you can take on that roll of film. So I think don't get scared off by really fancy cameras with huge price tags. You can get into it for not that much, and just have a good time without that much investment.
I suppose, there's like secondhand. There must be secondhand stuff.
All of it is basically.
I think I might have gotten rid of it now, but I did find like a film camera, 35mm film camera that was just like, I think it was my dad's when he was probably younger than I am now. You know what I mean? And I could have, if I'd chosen to, gone and used that. So they're about from people who might have bought them when that was all you could have, and they've since lived in the loft. Ask your grandparents, I guess.
Absolutely, I'm sure someone will have something lying around, and it's a easy hobby because again, it kind of gets you out there and gets you to do stuff. Lovely.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. I'm glad we could do this. And by all means, as you're so such a key and influential person within Heatblare, we'll probably get you on again in the future as these things. As you're basically the voice of Heatblare, is what we're saying, isn't it?
Yeah. Run the disclaimer.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you for that, and thank you everyone. If you've made it this far, you're a true hero. I'm not at the point yet where I'm intending to edit any of these. It's probably going up exactly as it is, and I'll never think about it again. So thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Activity, for your time, and I'll catch you all on the next episode of the LovoCast.
Thank you all for watching.